guys, welcome back to the channel. Okay, today's video we're going to talk about HRV, specifically like what it is and maybe how you can actually benefit from knowing that number with your running, with your training. So let's jump right into it. In case you're not going to be surprised to hear this, but I actually came across an article in Marathon Handbook, and that's what led me to want to talk to you guys about it. Some of you may have questions on HRV, and some of you may not. And for those of you that don't, thanks for watching anyway. And of course, I would love to hear what your experience is with HRV. Like, I know most of your devices probably track it, but do you pay any attention to it? And I'll be sharing my own data a little later on, but we'll get to that when we get to it. But first of all, the Marathon Handbook article is titled, "What is Heart Rate Variability? Plus How to Use It in Your Training." It's kind of exactly what I promised you, right? Okay, so heart rate variability, to me, it seems very easy to understand what it is. It is the variability in your heart rate. So we all know about our heart rate, and like it beats a certain number of times a minute, and if it's lower, we're probably at rest, and if it's higher, we're probably doing something strenuous. But the heart rate variability is the difference between those beats of your heart. And some of you may be surprised to hear that it's not just a constant. So let's say for a very easy mathematical example, let's say your heart beats at 60 beats per minute, so that's 1 beat every second. Well, just because your heart is beating at 60 beats a minute doesn't necessarily mean that it's beating 1 beat every second. Sometimes it could be beating every 0.08 seconds, sometimes it could be beating every 1.2 seconds. So there's that variability that comes between each beat. And let me just jump right out and say this, because I was actually surprised at this, but it's not your heart rate variability when you're working out that actually matters. It's your heart rate variability at rest. And I'm sure whatever device or app you're using to track your heart rate variability knows this, and it'll probably average it out. Oh, and this is important too. You do want to look at the averages. And like our running in general, you don't want to compare yourself to anyone else. So just because your HRV is a certain number doesn't mean that my HRV is going to have anything to do with yours. Okay, now we can still read those numbers the same way. Like your HRV is a good indication of how your body is responding to stress, to recovery, and to your training demands. But it's really not just as easy as that, because things such as your age, your fitness level, your stress, your sleep, they can all affect how your HRV reports itself. That was clumsy. But the numbers that you see on your screen, on your app, whatever you're using to track it, those are influenced by a lot of other factors in your life. And that's actually what makes it such a good metric. Oh, and in case you're wondering, that variation between your heartbeats is measured in milliseconds. And the higher your heart rate variability, look, I know before I even finish that sentence, I know this seems pretty basic, and even if it's not basic, when I say it, you're going to be like, oh yeah, oh, that's obvious, Matt. But the higher your heart rate variability means the higher the variation between heartbeats is. And I know that's somewhat counterintuitive, right? Because one would think that the more consistent your heart beats, that's probably better. Like in all other things, we tend to want lower numbers, like especially our heart rate. Right? We want our heartbeat to be as slow as possible when we're recovering and when we're working out, because it means we've got like more room to stretch. But not so with heart rate variability. We kind of want to get that number up. But again, and this is worth repeating, everybody is different. So you cannot judge your HRV by anyone else's. And I'll share mine in a few minutes from my app. Now, the reason that we want a higher heart rate variability is because research has shown that a higher your heart rate variability is, it's a good indicator of how ready your heart is to handle stress. And the stress that we're talking about in this case is like vigorous exercise, so running. I mean, as well as just the everyday stress that we all deal with. Now, you know that your heart rate is controlled by the autonomic nervous system, which means you really don't do anything to make it happen. Like your heart is going to beat whether you want it to or not. Now, there are two branches of the autonomic nervous system. We've got the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, very simply, the sympathetic nervous system is what gets your body ready for stress, to fight or to flee. The parasympathetic nervous system, on the other hand, is like what gets your body ready to calm down, has a relaxing effect and lowers your heart rate. Now, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous systems, they work together, they blend, or for another analogy, they're constantly fighting each other, to get the upper hand. And that heart rate variability is an interplay between the instantaneous differences between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous systems. By the way, this is not a biology class. Probably wouldn't take anything I say, like, if you're sitting an exam or need to prove any kind of knowledge on physiology. But moving on. Now, the parasympathetic nervous system, that is the one that is going to give you your higher heart rate variability. And that is because when you're at rest, the fluctuations between your heartbeats are even greater. And that's why we really don't pay attention to our heart rate variability when we're in the middle of a hard workout. Like, we want to know what a heart rate variability is when we're sleeping, when we're at rest. And that's why if you follow along in like real time your heart rate variability, or you look back at a graph and you can see when you were sleeping to when you were awake or going for a run, your heart rate variability will be substantially lower when you're running. So, and I guess this is a fairly important part, but the reason that we want to track our HRV is because it's going to give us an insight into which branch of the autonomic nervous system is actually controlling our body. If our HRV is low all the time, it means we're probably in like a low-key state of stress. Like right now, I would say that my HRV is fairly low just because I'm probably stressed, you know, talking to the camera and needing to get this video done and then I have to edit it. But it's probably not quite as low as it was when I went for a run this morning. Now, if you look at your graph on whatever app you use, again, and your HRV is really high, that indicates that you have like a higher threshold to handle stress. So because you are not stressed, you have the ability to handle more stress. So in this way, your HRV is kind of giving you an indicator of how ready you are to like tackle difficult things. So going for a hard interval run or knocking out a tempo run or racing. Like you probably will see your HRV rise as you're tapering for a race because you're sleeping more. But remember, we're looking at averages. We're not looking at like minute to minute HRV readings. So for example, let's say that you notice one night that your HRV is like at 48 milliseconds, and then the next night your HRV drops to like 24 milliseconds. Well, that's a good indicator that your body is in a stress state. And if you have a hard workout plan the next day, it may be a good idea to like put that off for another day so you can get a little more recovery. And you already know this, but high levels of stress can actually put you off your workout. And these are any kinds of stress. Like our body can't differentiate between different kinds of stress, but if you're stressed, you won't be performing at your very best. And that's because when your heart rate variability is low, you don't have as much room for improvement. Like you can't stress it even more because you're already fairly stressed. So when you have a good heart rate variability, it's an indicator that your nervous system is healthy and well balanced. Now, you might be wondering, what's good? Again, good is different for everyone. You're going to want to track your heart rate variability over time to see like where your baseline is. So by monitoring your HRV, and look, I do get it. This might be a little too much for a lot of people, but if you are like a person or a runner like me, you know, you enjoy just tracking these data. Like I really don't do anything with it, but I do like to look at what these numbers are telling me, and maybe I'll act on it, maybe I won't. But I still want to know. Anyway, by tracking your HRV, it's like giving you a non-invasive way to track your physiological stress. It's also going to give you information about your degree of recovery from your workouts. It's going to give you insights into your readiness to train. So when it's come time for another workout, you know if you're ready or not. And it can serve as a sign of acute fatigue, and it can be a potential forewarning of illness. But if you're looking at HRV, you're probably also looking at your heart rate. And we know that a higher resting heart rate, usually a couple of days before you get sick, it kind of gives you that indication or the potential for getting sick. Now look, I assume that you can probably tell if you have some stress in your life, and if you do, maybe you're so used to it that you might not recognize it, or you might be not doing anything to fix it. But following that HRV, you know, your trend line over time, if it's like consistently low, like in the overnight hours when you're sleeping, when it should be going up just a little bit, that could be a good indicator that you have a lot of stress in your life and you may want to make some changes. Now, you should know that across the population, heart rate variability tends to decline with age, and it is lower in females than it is in males. So Whoop is actually a very handy tool. So the Whoop website is a very handy tool for looking at like what's normal for HRV for both gender and age. So I'm going to put something on your screen right now, and I want you to get ready to hit pause because you're probably going to want to press pause just so you can like find out where you are and see if your HRV actually lines up with what Whoop says is the middle 50% of HRV by age. So I think that's probably been enough time. You can just rewind the video just a little bit if you didn't get that, and you can press pause and then take a screenshot or do whatever you need to do. Okay, so on your screen right now, I am looking at the health app, the Apple Health app that data gathered from my Apple Watch Ultra feeds into. So remember, this is my heart rate variability. I'm going to be showing you like over time, because over time I wear my Apple Watch Ultra the most, and this is what has gathered the most long-term information for me. But you can see right now on the screen, it looks like 47 milliseconds, which, you know, that's actually a pretty recent reading, like since I've been on the video. So obviously I'm not very stressed talking to you guys, but if we go back, and you can look on the top left-hand corner of my phone screen right here, you can say this is the day view. And if I scroll back, you can see this low point right here, 23 milliseconds. Like, to me, that's a little bit concerning because that is between 9 p.m. and 10 p.m. last night, and I was already asleep at that time. So if we jump up to between 1 and 2 a.m., we can see it has climbed to 39, but I'm going to come back just a little bit. We see a fairly high time for me. Remember, yours are going to be very different. You could be over 100 for all I know, but we can see between 5 and 6 a.m. that's 67 milliseconds heart rate variability, and I'm probably awake at this time and I'm probably sipping a coffee, so I'm in a very relaxed state. And then if we go back just a couple hours, these are still pretty good numbers for me. So let's expand this out to the week and it looks like we can go by week. It looks like my average is 37 milliseconds, which is pretty low, but remember, we are tracking over time. So let's click on this daily average on this day. So I am filming this on Boxing Day, 47 milliseconds. That's pretty good. So you can see the trend is kind of going up, but let's go back to earlier in the week. It looks like my average was 33 milliseconds. Now, let me just overlay this graph again to show you where the average, and I am 47 years old. So if we come up on the graph, like I am right on the lower end of what's normal. Well, normal for the 50%. So actually half the population is below and half the population is above, but I'm on the lower end of that middle line. So let's expand out my view by the month. This gives a little better idea of my heart rate variability over time. And I'm still glad to see that there is a slight climb like towards the end, towards current time. And then let's go out to 6 months. And actually this looks like there's been a decline in my heart rate variability over the last 6 months. But remember, since Berlin, I had COVID after I ran Berlin, and then I just felt, I didn't feel like on top of my game for months. So anyway, I'm not surprised that there was a little drop like right in October, which is exactly when I had COVID. And then let's expand it out to a year. And again, it looks like I've been pretty consistent up until the time that I ran the Berlin Marathon, and then I got COVID, and then my heart rate variability dropped to 39 in October, and then 35 in November, and then we're climbing back just a little bit to 37. But for most of the time, like leading up to Berlin, 44, 45, that was a 42. But I can also scroll back, and yeah, I'm pretty consistent over time. I wonder why it isn't going back further than that. Maybe that is 2 years. I think I've had this watch for 2 years, and I wear it like pretty much all the time. But there you go. Look, I only share my HRV with you because really it's like fill some video time. I didn't have anyone else's HRV to share, so I may as well share mine. But you can't judge yourself by me, and I can't judge myself by you. For a long time, I was like, I'd look at my HRV and I think, you know, why is it so low? But maybe that's just how I am. And the same thing goes with running. Like, look, we can only do what we can do, right? Maybe we can make incremental changes, but I can't compare myself to people like Kipchoge, right? I'm never going to run that fast. In the same way, I can't compare my HRV with people with much higher HRV. But either way, that doesn't take away from it being an excellent metric to track our physiological and nervous system health. So now I want to hear from you. I guess I'm just repeating the same question as I did in the beginning of the video, but I would like to hear if you track your HRV, and if you feel like sharing maybe what your average has been in the last month. And if you haven't made it to this point in the video, I want you to drop, it's very simple, I want you to drop the heart emoji in the comments just to let me know that you made it to this point in the video. And with that, it's Matt B. This has been a video on heart rate variability and how we can actually use it. Be kind, be happy, run well. I'll see you in a couple of days.